So let's introduce Meike Ramon. She's the next speaker. She's the first keynote speaker, and she will be present as a remote participant. Meike is a German cognitive neuroscientist. She's recently living in Switzerland and is a real European person. She started her career at the University of Bochum in Germany, where she got her diploma, then moved on to Belgium, where she got her PhD. And then in the aftermath, she just wandered to Scotland, where she was a research fellow and visiting research fellow, and then moved to Switzerland. So she has a very wide range of experience in the field. She was a principal investigator and group leader at the University of Fribourg in Switzerland. And since March 29, she is the head of the Applied Face Cognition Lab, which is funded by a very interesting organization, which is called PRIMA. It's promoting women in academia. And let's welcome Meike Ramon.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the warm introduction. It's a really great honor to be able to join you, at least virtually, if not in the flesh. Again, I can't stress enough how fortunate I feel that we are able to use this platform and to exchange with everyone in this amazing network. And I'm looking forward to presenting to you today the Berlin model for super recognizer identification. And I want to share some insights in the development and also the future implementation. But before I get there, I really have to stress that although he is not listed as one of the speakers, the work that I will be presenting today is really the brainchild of my dear colleague Simon Rios from the Berlin Police and I, and together, collaboratively, we've been working on this project for the past 3.5 years, I'd say almost 4 years. So yeah, we're really excited to talk about this to you today. So what are we talking about? Well, first of all, it all concerns facial identity processing. And this is something that I've been investigating for over 15 years now. And I've been looking at both impairments of facial identity processing, the normal range, but also highly superior face processing, and how these differences are implemented in the human brain. And as Frau Nese just introduced, my lab is currently actually funded by a very competitive research grant that was awarded by the Swiss National Science Foundation to investigate the mechanisms of superior face recognition. So the reason why I'm speaking to you here is it's an extension of what already happened in the second workshop in February this year. So super recognizers is one of the facets of one of the several key topics of this EU consortium, SafeCi. And so perceptual technologies and developments include, amongst other very exciting topics, the topic of super recognizers and how these can be utilized as human tools to enhance public safety. And most importantly, the public's perception of safety as well. And the work that I'll be referring to today, I'm just going to put it out here. The slides are all available later. These are forthcoming related publications that I'll be referring to throughout the talk in case you're interested. So why are you here today? I think that there are probably 3 different reasons. So a large proportion of the participants today will be either researchers who might be interested in aspects that relate to public safety, and for obvious reasons, police practitioners and people who are dealing with law enforcement. But you might also be part of the public, civilians who are joining this open event. And that's why right now, first, I want to take the opportunity to thank again the SafeCi team for making this public, because I really think that this is an important aspect of increasing safety for the public. And I just want to highlight from the onset that what I'll be presenting today is actually just one of many possible examples how science and policing can come together to really face the challenges of our future. So let's dive into it. The Berlin model for super recognizer identification, from development to implementation. So I'll be giving you an outline of what's been happening over the past 3.5, 4 years. So I'll give you a little bit of background on human face processing and how it relates to public safety. Then I'll present the problem and as well the solution that we created, which is currently being piloted. And the goal today is really to inform all of these people coming from different backgrounds about this work that is still in progress and that will hopefully always evolve and develop to become something better, and that will be a tool for the public and many practitioners as well. So to give you a little bit of background, we're talking about super recognizers. And for those of you who were present at the last meeting, you might remember that practitioners might have a somewhat different definition of what civilians might expect. And without going into it in too much detail, what I want to stress is that today what we're talking about when I talk about super recognizers is individuals who possess superior face processing abilities. So we're really talking about skills that concern facial identity processing. And this is really different from person recognition, which importantly can be achieved through many other cues, such as height, posture, gait, and so forth, and which also form a very critical component of law enforcement and criminal investigation. But it's really important to stress that what I'm talking about today has to do with facial identity processing. What we know is that currently there is no formal definition or diagnostic consensus on what actually constitutes a super recognizer and how they should be identified. We do not know the prevalence in the normal population. You might have heard some numerical values and percentage points circulating in the media, but the fact of the matter is there is no empirical evidence to support any such number. So we currently do not know how frequent super recognizers are amongst us. What we do know, however, is that their abilities are highly varied. They possess different individual skill profiles, and this is really important and interesting for law enforcement and safety as well. And in case you're interested, there is actually a solution to the problems that we have. And if you're interested in this publication, please feel free to contact me. So this is what I want to focus on right now, the different skill profiles that super recognizers could have. And this is important because with faces and in face processing, we can do different things with faces. So if I show you this image, you'll be able to very, very quickly assess a number of different types of information. So you'll be able to answer different questions. How many faces are there? Are these all the same person that I see here? Or have I seen a given person before? And who is it? And all of these questions relate to the processing level that we engage in with faces. And this is actually quite unique because for objects, we don't usually process objects or other stimuli on these different levels. And these different processing levels require different types of skills. So while being able to detect the presence of a face is something that's purely perceptual, I just need to be able to visually perceive something. Recalling the name or the profession of an individual, that relies also on memory on top of visual processing. So this is really important. And there are various differences across these processing levels, namely, first and foremost, some are easier than other. So as you increase in this processing level cascade, difficulty also increases. And very importantly, we can think about different types of ways that images can vary, and these types of image variations can have different impacts on these different processing levels. So if you consider, for example, this image here, this is very easy to see A, that there is a face, B, who it is, despite the fact that the face is partially occluded. But this is actually quite a challenging task for certain algorithms who may even fail to detect its presence. And lastly, what's also very important and cannot be stressed enough is that there is a large degree of individual differences even within and across these processing levels. And this is quite important if we consider the foundation, the basis of super recognizer research. So how did it all start? Over 10 years ago, Richard Russell and his colleagues reported 3 individuals who looked somewhat different than normal controls. So these 3 individuals seem to excel in a range of different tasks, 2 of which I'm plotting here on the different axes. On the bottom, what you can see here is that they had high performance on the so-called Cambridge face memory task, something that requires memorizing previously unfamiliar faces and later recalling them. And they were also extremely proficient at the so-called before they were famous test, in which participants had to identify childhood images of celebrities that were unbeknownst to them. The images were not familiar to them. And what we can see here is that these people apparently excelled at these highest processing levels. So this is really important because it seems that without having any type of special training or experience, these super recognizers excelled on multiple levels of face processing. And this is really important because we know that these processing levels are actually quite challenging. And then the question is, well, what about normal people? How do they actually perform? And what separates us from super recognizers? Well, normally what we might think that face processing is easy because we're highly proficient in everyday life. I don't have difficulties recognizing my partner or family members. But in fact, normally face processing with unfamiliar faces is quite difficult. And I'll show you one example to illustrate this. So consider, for example, identification verification or passport controls where a law enforcement officer would have to decide whether or not the person who is physically in front of her or him is the same as shown on the document. So this is a classical task of facial discrimination. The question being, is this the same person or are these two different people who we see? Well, actually, this is quite difficult for even highly trained humans to do. There are several anecdotes where accidentally and unbeknownst to the passenger, people have successfully, albeit not knowingly, traveled or intentionally traveled to a different country and successfully passed multiple passport checks, even though they were actually traveling with their different gendered spouse's passport. And we also know that face processing is a hard task, not only for humans, but also for machines. And most of us will have heard something in the media about difficulties and issues concerning automatic recognition solutions and the reasons why many of these solutions are either being discontinued or have to be further developed before they're implemented on a large scale. So in general, what we can say is that there's actually a growing interest in super recognizers for a number of different reasons. On the one hand, there is a growing demand for image and video processing because of the increased number of CCTV cameras that are in public spaces, for example, but also everyone has access to a smartphone, a video camera, or a photo camera and so forth. And also these issues that I just mentioned concerning automatic solutions. And it's very interesting because ultimately, humans always have the final say when it comes to decisions regarding a person's identity. And that's why the idea is that we should use the most skilled people, so super recognizers, to perform these critical tasks, which are very important. But how do we find these people? That's the most pressing issue that then continues from this logic. And I guess that, one could ask the question, how should we find super recognizers for law enforcement? And, being among the SafeCi participants here, I think that a lot of people would say, well, based on professional performance, we can peer evaluate their performance on the job and determine whether or not someone is actually proficient. Of course, as an experimental psychologist, as someone who's trained with experimentation, I have to be conservative in this regard. And in fact, I also have an anecdote when it comes to the investigations that were conducted in the aftermath of the mass attacks on women at the Cologne Dome on New Year's Eve 2015. There was actually the London Metropolitan former super recognizer unit had offered their help to support the criminal investigation in the aftermath. And the officers had identified 3 individuals who they said possessed exceptional skills and were potentially super recognizers. And I had the opportunity to investigate, to experiment with these 3 officers. And it was very interesting to me because one of them actually said, I'm not good with faces. I'm a former undercover cop and I'm really, really good at detecting suspicious behavior, which I know that we'll also be hearing about later in this workshop. And in fact, when I tested this person, formal testing confirmed that their face recognition skills were indeed actually below average. So this really brings home the point that experience-based identification of people with alleged exceptional skills is a procedure that might be intuitive, but it definitely also lacks objectivity. And so what we need are really more objective tools to be very certain about the type of people that we identify. So as I've said before, there is no clear definition of what super recognizers are, and that responsibility lies on the shoulders of the academics who need to come to a consensus about which tests are actually appropriate for identifying these people. And as I said before, this is something that we are working on, so I think that the solution will be there soon. And most importantly, I think what's really critical for practitioners, for a majority of you who are listening, is that the available tests probably don't really tap into what is interesting for you from a professional perspective. And to demonstrate this, I want to make you aware of a study that I have started and is still ongoing with the Criminal Investigation Office of the Canton of Fribourg, who had provided video material of real cases of crimes that were committed. And we looked at how well super recognizers that were identified in the lab were able to identify suspects in suspect lineups. Yeah, so the classic task of someone who is investigating crimes based on image or video material. And what we found was that actually people who were identified in the lab through experimental tests, through psychological tests, can outperform professionals, but that this gold standard test that has been used, the Cambridge Face Memory Test, alone was not a very good predictor of performance. So this all shows that while there may be merit, the existing methods are not very ideal. They're suboptimal for super recognizer identification with respect to law enforcement. And in fact, they're also not ideal to later evaluate the deployment efficacy. So that's why we came up with a very unique solution. We had to create something that was new and that did not exist, because there was simply no other tool that we could have made use that would have met the expectations and the needs of the Berlin police. And this tool that we developed, it entails certain components, only some of which I can actually go into detail for data protection reasons, but we will publish this as soon as everything is completed. So first and foremost, one of the main criteria was that it's professionally relevant. This is something that was intended to be used within the police and for the police purposes. So what we first did was we really tried to utilize all of the valuable knowledge, the collective knowledge that exists amongst so many thousands of employees of the police, and we performed various interviews with practitioners to determine exactly which are the tasks that are most of interest, where super recognizers could really be the most benefit, where could they do the best work, and what could be improved with them. And what materialized was that super recognizers would be really good in terms of supporting image search and image comparison tasks. So anywhere where maybe a series of crimes have to be put together, or there are large quantities of data that have to be evaluated. And so this is one of the core aspects. And the second one relates to tasks that have to do with search and surveillance, where there are a lot of people and individually known criminals might have to be identified. So these are the two core tasks that we identified through these various interviews with practitioners. And what also transpired was that it's really important that we use authentic police material. So it's really a must that we test people with the types of material that they will later have to analyze and use and deal with. And another criterion that was really important to us was that we implemented we implemented these procedures in controlled scenarios and uncontrolled scenarios, and we validated our procedures before we released the test on a large portion of the employee population. So what did we do? We translated these tasks that we identified through the interviews into psychological experiments. And then we ran these experiments under two different conditions. On the one hand, under controlled conditions where a number of employees were performing the tests when an experimenter, so we were physically present. And on the other hand, we also ran this in uncontrolled conditions because later the idea is that people could perform these tests within their office from their computer. So we really had to run these experiments under two different conditions to make sure that they provide the same type of data quality as well as results. And so this is the pilot study that we started this year in September, which we were also extremely fortunate to have the opportunity to have this be accommodated by press and journalists who actually had the opportunity to look at the procedures, as well as some other country police who were also involved. So our last criterion is that the solution that we wanted to create and develop had to be difficult. What we're interested in is really finding the best of the best. We want to scrape off the top of the entire population of police employees to make sure that we identify those who are exceptional. And so that's why we had these tests again that were run under controlled and uncontrolled conditions. And we did these tests and we looked at how individuals performed. So we had roughly comparable cohorts who did these tasks. And for those of you who might not be familiar with dealing with visualizations of data, this little graphic here is supposed to represent that what I will be showing you are individual participants. So the bars are people, and the height of their bar relates to how well they performed. So low is worse performance and high is better performance. So for instance, Simon is worse than I am at face processing. But we both lie somewhere above or around the normal average. So the horizontal line represents how people on average perform. So our model includes a number of different experiments, and I won't go into the details of how many and what types, but it's safe to say that we have a number of tasks that are becoming increasingly complex, which we ran and validated under different conditions. And what we see here is that the first task, you can see the individual employee's performance and how they performed as a whole. And what's extremely beautiful, and this might look too perfect, in fact, I was very extremely lucky to find this. We find highly consistent behavior. So this first experiment was performed extremely comparably under both controlled and uncontrolled conditions. And we also found that, as predicted, because that's how we created this model, our performance also decreased because of the increase in task difficulty. And we saw this across both the controlled and uncontrolled conditions as well. So to summarize, what we find is that employees who participated in this test consistently performed very consistently regardless of where they were tested, and in line with our predictions and our goals for this specific method, this behavior consistently decreased across experiments. So that's really a prerequisite to be able to then later use this. And again, all of these procedures, all the details of all the procedures that we implemented, they will all be made publicly available for others to view, critique, evaluate, implement, and for us to have ongoing discussions about that. So in summary, I think that what we have developed is an extremely unique tool of something that meets a lot of expectations in terms of being professionally relevant, controlled and validated, but also difficult. And so you probably are wondering what's next, what's happening now? Well, right now what we're doing is we're completing the pilot. This will be completed to the end of the year, so we're actually still piloting as we speak. And the full rollout will be ready from the beginning of next year. And this, as I mentioned before, is intended to be completed in these uncontrolled conditions. So basically, any police employee could do this within their general working environment. And the idea would be that volunteers from the entire cohort of 18,000 police employees would be able to participate in these procedures. And at this point, I really want to acknowledge people who were not only instrumental but crucial for this. On the one hand, I want to thank my funder and my lab for making it possible for me to investigate this highly interesting question, and all of the research participants. And I know that some of you are watching, so I want to thank you very much. Your participation is critical for us understanding these concepts. That's one thing that I really can't stress enough. Thank you. And on the other hand, the amazing people from the Berlin police. I really have to emphasize that this is an exceptional project. I can't stress enough how much foresight and openness for innovation the State Office of Criminal Investigation and Christian Steyhoff really had with this, and to give us the freedom to pursue this in the way that it was necessary is not normal. So I really thank you very much for that as well. And also all of the experts who participated in the interviews, who shared their valuable knowledge of many, many years of experience with us. All of the people who participated and are still participating in our pilot study, thank you so much. You're very important. Everyone who dealt with data protection. Yes.
So, Meike, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we are really running late. Yes, I need to interrupt you at this point. Sorry for that. We are quite happy that we could get an insight in the mechanisms of superior face recognition. And yes, we are very proud that you are advisor for the Berlin police in this area, and in regard to the Berlin model for super recognized identification. So thank you very much, and I will briefly allow 2 short questions so that we can move on and do not lose too much time. So do we have a question here from the audience? Heike. Just a minute. Just hold on.
So what does science know about the genetic background? So this is a very big question. So maybe some ideas.
Currently, nothing is known. So I can tell you right now that there are, at present, to my knowledge, I think 15 empirical studies that have looked at super recognizers, none of which have addressed any of the mechanisms. In fact, currently there's only one single publication that has even started to address the electrophysiological basis. And as you can imagine, in the absence of a clear criterion for identifying super recognizers, if your diagnostics aren't sharp, it's difficult to identify the people to then look at the genetic basis. So I think we first have to establish that foundation to then ultimately look at this very important question, which is one that is very dear to me as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Christian, do we have anything from the outside world, from the virtual world?
Yeah, we also have a question from our online audience. An anonymous user asked everybody knows this from personal experience, that facial recognition seems to be culturally influenced. And the question is if we do have these effects by super recognizers as well. So does a Caucasian super recognizer can recognize people of color as good as he could recognize Caucasian people, for example? This is the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a really interesting question. So this relates to whether or not people who have exceptional skills also show a benefit or an advantage for discriminating or recognizing people of their own ethnic background. So to my knowledge, there are currently 2 empirical studies who have investigated this. And one suggests that, yes, they show a normal own ethnic background advantage. And the other one says that it can be larger in magnitude. So I guess the question is still out for grabs. I would say that it makes sense to assume that what you're used to seeing is what you're good at processing, and maybe having exceptional skill will just boost that to another level.
So thank you very much. I have to make a cut right here.
To assume that what you're used to seeing is what you're good at processing, and maybe having exceptional skill will just boost that to another level.
So thank you very much. I have to make a cut right here. All people online, actually put your questions into the chat. We will come to that later during the panel discussion. And let's thank Meike for her presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.